BhagavatSanga program. As you all know, this is our Srimad Bhagavatam program. And the current theme, which is going on, is prayers of Nagapatnis. These are very beautiful prayers. They are in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter 16, from verses 33 to 53. So today we have a very wonderful and amazing devotee who will be presenting the verses and realizations for our benefit. So today it will be Guruvani Mataji presenting. So Hare Krishna, Guruvani Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Hare Krishna devotees. I'll just share my screen first.
Yes, Mataji, we can see.
So I'll start with some prayers. Om Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Mataji Nirvishesha Shunyadi Paschati Tirtharini Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So as Veena Mataji said, we are discussing the prayers of Nagapatnis, which comes in the Srimad Bhagavatam chapter, Canto 10, chapter 16. So before we go to the actual prayer part, I'm going to just summarize the story a little bit, and also some of the unique points that Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purports during this the part that comes before the prayers. I'll just go through that quickly. So the story starts with like why Garuda was not allowed to feast on the fish or snakes in the Yamuna river. So there was a sage called Saubhari Muni. He was undergoing mystic yoga. He was undergoing a lot of austerities. And so he was underwater in Yamuna river doing a penance. And when Garuda would feast on the fish in the Yamuna river, it would cause a lot of agitation in the river, and it would disturb this Saubhari Muni. So because it angered him because of the disturbance, he cursed Garuda that he cannot come and feast on the fish or snakes in Yamuna river. And because he cursed a pure devotee who is a very close servant of Krishna, he got consequences for his actions in the form of falling down from his position as a yogi and losing all his credits, actually, because he gets attracted by the by looking at two fish who are mating. He gets attracted and he wants to give up and go and lead a family life. So in that way, it shows how, like, when you offend a devotee, how much ever great accomplishments you can have, those all can be lost when you offend a great devotee of the Lord. So anyway, because of this, the Garuda is unable to hunt in Yamuna river. And then there is an island called Ramanaka where there are a lot of snakes, and Garuda would go there, and he hunts there, and the snakes, out of respect for Garuda, would offer a feast every day under a banyan tree. They would give it as their offering to him. But there was a very envious snake, very proud snake named Kalia, and he was always taking the offerings that were put for Garuda, and he would eat himself. So he was very envious that the resources that were allotted for the service of the Lord's devotee, he was taking them. So you can understand how envious he was. So seeing that he was committing this offense, Garuda punished him. They had a big fight, and Kalia was reprimanded, and Kalia fled, and he knew that there was one place where Garuda cannot hunt him. and he went into Yamuna river and he started residing there. And he made, Srila Prabhupada mentions that by using a mystic science called Jalastambha, that means he could construct solid structures out of water. So he was not very ordinary serpent. He had a lot of mystic powers too. So he constructed, using this siddhi named Jalastambha, he constructed a big palace in the Yamuna river. And he was living there with his whole family, with his wives and children. And because these were all poisonous serpents, Kalia would ooze a lot of poison into the river Yamuna, and the poison effect was so much that even the vapors filled the sky, and even birds couldn't fly across Yamuna. And of course, the vegetation around the Yamuna banks and also all the living entities around were affected. So it looked like a dead area, all the area around the Yamuna. And sometimes we may wonder that how come the poison did not spread to other areas like Mathura and Dwarka, where Yamuna would go pass through. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that it was because the current of this branch of Yamuna was actually opposite to the current of the other branches. So the water remained contained in that area. So when this was happening, then once the cows and some of the cowherd boys got poisoned by drinking the water in the Yamuna, and they couldn't play around Yamuna, which was their favorite pastime. So when Krishna saw that his devotees or his dearest devotees were endangered by this poisonous water, then he got very upset. And then he wanted to go and reprimand Kalia. So he went to the bank of the river Yamuna, and he climbed up a tree. And this tree was previously dead, but since Krishna climbed up, it started becoming alive and giving leaves and everything. And then there is a beautiful description of how Krishna, before he's jumping, he secured his flute, he tied his belt very tightly around his waist, and then he tied, they say at some places he tied his hair back, and then he slapped his arms, showing how he was ready for a fight, and he jumped into the Yamuna. And the part of Yamuna where Kalia was residing was actually very wide. It was 8 miles wide, and the depth was like a depth of an ocean. So the ocean cannot be agitated by something little falls in the ocean. It cannot be agitated. But when Krishna jumped, the water overflew on the surrounding in the banks. It came up out of the bank, just like if a very heavy object falls in the water, then the water spills out on the brink, it comes out of the brink. In the same way, when Krishna, the little boy, he jumped into the ocean, the water overflowed. And when he was then in the beginning, Krishna, when Kalia saw Krishna, he got angered and he wound him up in his coils. And Krishna pretended like he was completely surrendered to Kalia, and he was unconscious. So there were a lot of bad omens because this was like very inauspicious. And when the Vrindavan Vasis saw that there was this kind of bad omens, and then knew that Krishna had left alone without Balram to tend the cows, they realized that something might have really bad happened. And when they ran to the banks of Yamuna, and when they were running, they were following the footsteps of Krishna by the markings on the footsteps of Krishna. So one may ask, how come there were still the footsteps? Because Krishna had left in the morning to tend the cows, and since then the footsteps should have been erased by the different animals in the Vrindavan forest. But Srila Prabhupada explains that I think it is explanation by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura that Krishna is Vishpati. He is the master of the cowherd community, and he's the wealth of all living beings in Vrindavan. So whenever they see anything of Krishna, they preserve it with so much of care and so much of love, like a great treasure. So even the footsteps that Krishna has walked, all the inhabitants of the Vrindavan forest, including the animals, they preserve those footsteps because they're greatest treasures. So when all the Vrindavan Vasis went into the bank of the river, they saw that Krishna was fighting. I mean, Krishna was unconscious, and they also were very worried, and they lost consciousness. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura mentions that Balaram was actually a little upset because Balaram is Adishesha. He's also a serpent with lot of hoods. And he was thinking, how come Krishna doesn't play with me in my snake form, in the serpent form? And he never plays with me like this. And now he's playing with Kalia. He's jumping on the hoods like that. So all the Vrajvasis were so upset, and they were almost like losing their lives. So one may ask, why is Krishna is supposed to provide happiness to the devotees? Then why is he causing this kind of anxiety to the all the Vrajvasis? So Srila Prabhupada explains that this expression or these feelings that the Vrajvasis were feeling were not material. They were actually not because of fear or anxiety, but they were because of intense love for Krishna. They were actually concentrated feelings of love for Krishna. So this is what actually to bring out this ecstasy of love in this form, Krishna shows that he was in danger. But when he sees that they are also showing this love, immediately he remembers his primary duty, that is reciprocation. So he reciprocates by waking up and then dancing on the heads of the Kalia. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that in the purport that he specifically danced to attract the young women of Vrindavana, to give the pleasure to them. So when he's dancing, he grabs the heads of Kalia and he's forcing them to bow down. And this is like we condition souls. When we become proud of our insignificant position, we become reluctant to bow our heads to the Lord. But either by his material energy, if we don't bow our heads to the spiritual energy, then Krishna forcibly bows it down through his material energy. So that's what was happening to Kalia. Then when he was dancing, and initially Kalia was vomiting his poison out. He was like vomiting so much of poison out. And then when he had vomited completely all his poison, he started vomiting blood. And then Kalia was aware of Krishna's supreme position, because he heard from his wives who were devotees the position of Krishna. So when his poison had gone out of his body, then he remembered his wives, how they tried to convince him to be a devotee. So then he started becoming a little humble, and he started becoming humble and started begging Krishna. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura mentions that at first the Nagapatnis, when they saw Kalia being like danced upon by Krishna and stepped upon by Krishna, they thought, oh, Kalia is so evil and he's so envious. It's better he passes away while Krishna is stepping on him. That is better, because that way at least he will have a better birth. Like that they were thinking. But when they saw the expression after he has spilled out all his poison, then they saw that he is actually now humbled. And now they wanted to pray to Krishna to actually forgive him. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that this is how a Vaishnava is, that a Vaishnava sees that we have tried to give up all our bad habits, we are trying to give up our bad qualities. Then he makes a recommendation to Krishna. He sees that even the little sign that we are trying, then a Vaishnava makes a recommendation to Krishna. And the Vaishnava sees the sincerity first. And then when we give up all our poison, all our anarthas, then the Vaishnava gives the recommendation to Krishna. So in this way, we can understand how merciful the Vaishnavas were, and also how advanced the Nagapatnis were in like how much philosophy they were aware of. So we'll go through a few prayers. So this is the verse 34. This one shows about how much advanced, like we have heard Satsar Prabhu also before, that a sign of advancement of a Vaishnava is when he is clearly able to see the mercy of Lord also as a, I mean, the punishment or any kind of difficulties are also the mercy of Lord. So this is verse 34. Anugrahoyam bhavata krito hino dando satam te khalu kalmashapaha yaddanda sukatvam amushya dehina krodopite nugraha eva sammata. So they were praying, what you have done here is actually mercy for us, since the punishment you give to the wicked certainly drives away all their contamination. Indeed, because this conditioned soul, our husband, is so sinful that he has assumed the body of a serpent, your anger towards him is obviously to be understood as your mercy. So they saw that actually when Krishna is giving the punishment of pain by stepping on the hoods of Kaliya, they were actually helping Kaliya to spit out all the poison. So even when we go through some difficulties in our devotional service or in our life, these are actually Krishna stepping on our heads so that we can spill out or we can vomit out all the poison. And then if the advanced devotees or devotees who are surrendered can see like that. So I myself am not at that level, but it is something that to remember when we face any difficulties, especially in devotional service, that it is how we react is how we are throwing out poison. Like if we have poison in our heart, we will react to it in a poisonous way. But nevertheless, it is a way where Krishna helps to bring out our anarthas and confront them. So this way, we can understand that devotees, the Vaishnavas, can see how even the punishment as a mercy of Lord Krishna. And the next verse also, it shows the advancement of how Nagapatnis were advanced Vaishnavas. So, tapah sutaptam kimanena purvam nirastamanena chamanadena dharmo tava sarva jananukampaya yato bhavam stushyati sarva jiva. Did our husband carefully perform austerities in previous life with his mind free of pride and full of respect for others? Is that why you are pleased with him? Or did he, in some previous existence, carefully execute religious duties with compassion for all living beings? And is that why you, the life of all living beings, are now satisfied with him? So here they were actually trying to understand the contradictory things that were happening, because a serpent is supposed to be like a personification of envy and jealousy and that kind of quality. So greed and envy, basically. So they knew that Kaliya got this body because he was envious, or he did something very bad in his last life. So that's why he got a body of a serpent. Yet he got the unconditional mercy, this great mercy, where Krishna immediately helped him to get out of that envious nature and directly stepped with his feet on his head. So they were thinking we could understand by the body he received that he was envious, but what did he do to deserve this much of mercy? Like, did he do all these pious activities in the last birth, or what was the reason? Like that they were contemplating. So this reminded me of in earlier days, disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Like if we materially saw these disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they were like drug addicts, they were like completely like living on the streets, they were not, they gave up everything, and they didn't have a plan in life. So if a regular person saw them, they would think, oh, these people are like, I don't know what bad karma they did in their previous life that they got this kind of existence in this life. That's what you would think. But then they met Srila Prabhupada and they immediately jumped to the highest position spiritually. So that's how the immediate contrast we see just with the contact of either Krishna or devotees of Krishna, how even the most abominable birth can convert into the most highest blessing. So the two contradictory facts actually astonished them. And in the next few verses, they tell about how Kalia got the most greatest opportunity of having the dust of Lord's lotus feet, which was even unattained. Even for Lakshmi Devi, it took so much of austerity to actually get to that position. And once you get to that position, they don't hanker for material things, because once Krishna touches you, then you don't want karma kanda, that is, you don't want material things, and we don't want any mystic yoga, or we don't want even liberation by jnana yoga. So that way they were understanding that this is the highest position actually Kalia got. And then he was they were saying how Kalia was under the modes of material existence, but material nature, and immediately in front of their eyes itself, he got completely cleared of those modes of existence. And then they describe on the 38th verse how bhakti works. So, O Lord, although Kalia, the king of serpents, has taken birth in the mode of ignorance, and is controlled by anger, he has achieved that which is difficult for others to achieve. Embodied souls who are full of desires are thus wandering in the cycle of birth and death, can have all benedictions manifested before their eyes simply by receiving the dust of the lotus feet. So though they may be in the most abominable birth, they can receive the highest benediction through the process of devotion. So a person may be very difficult when they are completely in the mode of ignorance, or even in any kind of modes, more so in mode of ignorance, to deliver themselves. It may be very difficult situation, especially if you see Kalia, he was so proud, he did not have any kind of obstacles. So it is very difficult for him to free himself. But by the mercy of the dust of the lotus feet of Krishna, he was able to free himself. In the same way, even for us, we may not even know how much deep we are in ignorance, but just by the mercy of Lord's representatives, we would be free from this kind of existence. And this one is the 40th verse. Jnana vijnana nidhaye brahmane nanta shaktaye agunaya vikaraya namaste prakritaya cha. Obeisances unto you, the absolute truth, who are the reservoir of all transcendental consciousness and potency, and the possessor of unlimited energies. Although completely free of material qualities and transformations, you are the prime mover of material nature. And then we go to. So in this verse, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that many a times when people are intellectual or they're philosophical or rational, they may feel that when they're taking up devotional service, they're actually losing these qualities. Because sometimes when people who are devotees, especially scientific community, sees them as like being sentimental or foolish, or they're not actually thinking rationally. But Srila Prabhupada says that, in fact, when we take up devotional service, we are becoming more rational and more philosophical and more intellectual. He describes it as merging into an ocean of rational and logical comprehension, because Supreme Personality of Godhead himself is the ocean of knowledge and consciousness. And so surrendering to the Lord does not entail that we have to give up rationality or we have to give up intellectuality. Lord is actually perfection of all sciences and all forms of knowledge. So we actually improve these qualities or the scope of these qualities beyond just understanding material things, and we can understand more deeper things. So it's not that once we take up devotional service, we become like superstitious or we believe everything like that, but it actually improves. We become more logical and more, our comprehension becomes more wider. And in this verse, Namah Pramana Mulaya Kavaye Shastra Yonaye Pravrittaya Nivrittaya Nigamaya Namo Namaha. So in this verse, actually, the Nagapatnis give the answer to the question. Like many a times people ask, so okay, we follow the Vedas, but Vedas must be also written by someone. So why should we follow Vedas or scriptures that are written by someone else? But here in this verse, it is given explanation how Krishna himself is the source of Vedas. So he's the source in several ways. Like he himself is Vyasadev, who is the compiler of Vedas. He manifests the scriptures in the hearts of Brahma and Narada. And also, even in the simple living entities, he gives the knowledge, he gives the perception, cognition, persuasion, and transmission. These are all the potencies of Supreme Lord. So if we are reading these Shastras and we are understanding them, that is because of the potency of the Lord. So even when we did the last segment on prayers of the Vedas, we saw how Krishna, when the question is asked how material senses, with our material senses, we can understand the scriptures which are spiritual, then the intelligence, the answer is given that the intelligence to understand itself is also given by the Lord. So in this way, the Nagapatnis are bringing out that point, that even though we understand it with our cognition, with our perception, with our persuasion, these are all actually the potencies of the Supreme Lord. In this way, the Lord manifests the Vedic literature, and also he helps us realize the Vedic literature. We'll go over one last verse. Namo Gunapradeepaya Gunatma Chadanaya Cha Gunavritti Upalakshyaya Gunadrashte Swasamvide. So though the material energy is coming from the Lord, it stands like a screen in between the Lord and the living entities. But that is also, it stands as an obstruction, and also it is a facilitator for us to surrender to the Lord. In Isopanishad, we learned how the material world, it is like a prison to someone who is under the material energy. But if we use the material energy, it can act as a step up to go back to spiritual world. So in the same way, there is a material energy screen between the Lord and the living entities, yet the material, understanding the material energy, the quality, how it works, understanding it improves, or it actually facilitates us to reach the Lord. So just like if there is some kind of a blockage or some screen in between us and our destination, knowing, oh, what is this obstacle made up of? What makes this obstacle be destroyed? Can it be broken? Can it be set on fire? These kind of things will improve our chance of getting through that obstacle. In the same way, knowing the material nature, material qualities, which are actually Lord's creation, knowing them will help us to overcome. And the Vedas and scriptures give us that source, how to know them and how to overcome them. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you,
Hare Krishna.
devotees.
Hare Krishna Mataji, that was a very beautiful class that you gave. Very beautifully you narrated the pastime of Kalia and Sabari Muni. And then very nice verses that you picked of this prayers of Nagapatnis, and the first one being a sign of Vaishnava is that he sees punishment of the Lord as a mercy of the Lord, or rather punishment as a mercy of the Lord. And it also shows us, your realizations that you shared, that it also shows to us that how we react in the difficult situation. And that shows how much poison we have. So that was a very beautiful point. And Mataji, you explained very nicely about how Nagapatnis were wondering of how did Kalia deserve so much mercy, and how he just got purified. He was in the mode of ignorance and material modes, and he just got purified, and they could witness that. So that was very beautiful, and also how we can get delivered by the representatives of Lord. We can get freed, and devotional path is the way for us to free from the cycle of birth and death. And finally, how this material energy we can use to come out of the cycle of birth and death, even though it's a prison, but we can use it for our advantage and come out. So very beautifully, you explained the verses and shared your realizations. Thank you very much, Mataji, for that. With that, devotees, thank you all so much for joining the BhagavatSanga program today. We will see you all next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.